and they had to call the technician from Tampere-talo. And if he doesn't show up in the next 5 minutes, then we're just gonna start and go ahead, because yeah. But in the meantime, I would like to introduce myself. I'm Aurora, and I speak like Finnish as my maiden tongue. So if you have any questions that you can't think of like the English word for it, like a specific English word or something, then you can also ask in Finnish. And I encourage to comment and ask questions in the middle of this presentation if you have any, because I'm a sucker for like debating facts. If you think you feel like you know better, then go ahead. But in the meantime, I was maybe wanting to gauge the amount of people that have played the game. Okay, so majority. Awesome. Also, follow-up question. Has anyone found all of the korok seeds yet? One person? Did you raise your hand? Oh, okay. Okay, does anyone have over 500? One person. Hey, awesome. Okay, third, or maybe this one is a little bit more relatable. How many have participated in korok torture so far? Yeah, that's what I thought. If you guys are okay, maybe I can ask more questions with like show of hands and stuff. I don't want to like make you guys too uncomfortable, like I'm totally judging your movements and everything, but I'm just like wanting to gauge what fellow players are like, because unfortunately I have 0 friends that have played the game, and I desperately need someone to talk to about this game, which is also part of the reason that I'm holding this presentation, because I am very much a nerd for this game. But how many are missing Cass from Breath of the Wild? He's the bard. He has these absolutely amazing songs in the first game, and I'm very sad that they just announced that there's going to be no DLC content for Tears of the Kingdom, which means that we're not going to get any Cass stories in this one, which is major sad. Oh, yes, go ahead. Yes, go ahead.
Did you have any trouble making this presentation since the game is pretty new?
Yes, I mean, thankfully I chose a pretty good subject that like doesn't require necessarily too much research, because it's like reading between the lines and like my own analysis and stuff. But like, for example, finding pictures and just like visual content for this slideshow was quite hard. Okay. Joo. Okay, mahtavaa. Kiitos. Okay, we just got the go-ahead that the stream is working now, which means that we can start, which is very amazing. So, as you can see, there will be spoilers for the game, in case you didn't already know, but just making sure that you're not going to be sad that like major plot twists are going to be revealed. I wanted to start this presentation with talking about how I got this idea. And it was from one of the Ask the Developers interviews that Nintendo holds for their developers of their games. So for example, like the Splatoon developers, and also in this case, the developers of Tears of the Kingdom. And they release a translated transcript of that onto their website. Unfortunately, I couldn't find the original video, But from the transcript that I could find, there was a lot. They had very extensive answers onto the ideas and the thoughts and the thought processes that went to making this game and how they thought about it. Especially following up a game as popular as Breath of the Wild is a pretty substantial achievement, especially with how well they did. So they knew that they had to really hit it out of the ballpark so that it can follow up such a success as Breath of the Wild. And one of the interview questions for the developers was immediately, oh, Link's hand looks different, like, what's the story behind that? And the developers replied that they wanted to make Link in this game unique to this game, so it's immediately recognizable that it's Link from Tears of the Kingdom instead of Breath of the Wild, or possible future games that are held in the same Hyrule Kingdom. And they then decided to run with this theme, and because every single Zelda game has a theme that intertwines all of the elements of the gameplay, the story, also the game mechanics, and something that just makes the game more cohesive that they can use as a kind of guideline on what to create in the game. And they had apparently chosen this theme quite early in production as well, so it really shows in all aspects of the game. And just like a couple mentions that the developers talked about hands that they wanted to highlight were the fact that, oh, well, the abilities are released from the right arm that Link has. All of everything that you do in the game and use to progress in the game are used with these abilities. And if you didn't use them, you couldn't really progress in the game. So it's a vital and core gameplay element. And in addition to that, there are a bunch of hand symbols all over the game. For example, when you open up shrines, there's the Zonai hologram that has a big hand sign on it, and Link touches his hand to the hand sign to open the door, which is quite on the nose, but it's a pretty obvious example. And then looking more into metaphorical aspects of the hands, they thought that hands are also something that like unites and connects people, because a lot of the time when you hold hands together, you're connected to the other person directly. And they wanted to use that element in the story to show that there are connections and relationships between the characters, especially compared to the first game, Breath of the Wild, which is quite a lonesome game. But in this game, the sequel, it's highlighted that you have to have these relationships and connections to be able to progress in the storyline and also in defeating the main antagonist. Even more metaphorically, they also consider that there is a connection between past and present Hyrule, and the hands theme connects those two with connections between characters that are from the past and the present, and so forth. And they went into even the tiniest details to use this hands theme. The sound developer said that they even used hand claps in some of the soundtrack making, and specifically hand noises, which is maybe a weird phrase, but hand noises to add ambiance and soundtrack. And I tried really hard finding where there would be such effects, but they didn't specify, and I couldn't find it by listening to hours of the soundtrack. So it's somewhere in there. And as I mentioned, the theme connects all of these different elements of the game. So there's the story, there's the characters, there's the relationships between the characters, there's the gameplay, there's the actual lore of the game, and what we figure out of what happens, and then the core gameplay mechanics as well. And before I get into the analysis, I wanted to do a summary of the story. I know that most of you already know it, but so that it's easier to put into context when it's refreshed. So that, oh, that happened. I remember that now. And for any of the people that haven't played the game, so they know what's going on, so that they're not completely lost. But Tears of the Kingdom starts immediately after its predecessor, Breath of the Wild, where Link has just defeated Calamity Ganon after he was sealed in Hyrule Castle for 100 years by Princess Zelda. And defeating Calamity Ganon causes Hyrule Castle to sustain damage and opens up these caves and underground passages under the castle that then immediately at the beginning of Tears of the Kingdom, Princess Zelda and Link are investigating. And in these underground passages, they find these murals. And these murals depict the imprisoning war, which was thought to be a myth up until this point in Hyrulean society. It's from the beginning, from the founding of the Kingdom of Hyrule, where a great evil is sealed, which we know is Ganondorf. And further into these passages, they find a dehydrated corpse that is very raisin-like, and there's a strange glowing arm attached to it. And of course they go investigate closer, because what else are you going to do at that point? And as it happens, the arm that seals Ganondorf falls off, and he reawakens. Immediately after waking up, he sends a bunch of gloom towards Zelda, and Link, of course, goes to block it, which causes his right arm and the Master Sword to be completely engulfed by the gloom, causing extensive injury to the Master Sword and the arm. In addition to this, the ground starts falling from underneath them, and Zelda falls, and Link, as her protector, of course, jumps immediately after her and tries to catch her, but he can't. And Zelda gets transported back into time, and Link is saved by the glowing arm. And basically the rest of the game, or the majority of the game after this, is that Link adventures in present time, trying to find Zelda and trying to figure out what happened to her, as well as helping the different regions of Hyrule with corruptions that Ganondorf caused with the Surge and Reawakening. During his adventures, he finds Dragon Tears, which are memories into the past, where we can piece together what happened to Zelda when she went to the founding of Hyrule's time. And there, she is taken under the wing of King Rauru and Queen Sonia, and they try and aid her to get back to her time, but at the same time, they're dealing with a conflict of their own, which is that the Gerudo King Ganondorf does not want to bow the knee and be under the rule of this new Kingdom of Hyrule that King Rauru leads. He launches an attack, but fails, and then swears fealty. But this is actually just a ploy to get a secret stone from one of the royals. The secret stones are these magical stones that amplify the power of one's user, and they're passed down from the Zonai, which is an ancient race. And Ganondorf ends up stealing one of the secret stones by murdering the queen, and he becomes the Demon King. And he is immensely more powerful now, and in order to defeat him, King Rauru confides in the peoples of Hyrule and gives them secret stones so that they become sages, so that they can help him fight. And so King Rauru, the four sages, plus his older sister and Princess Zelda, go against Ganondorf, and even though Ganondorf is outnumbered, he has immense strength, and they are unable to defeat him. So as a last act, Rauru sacrifices himself to seal Ganondorf until there's a time that someone can defeat him. After this, Zelda figures out why she was sent back in time. It is to restore the Master Sword and imbue it with her sacred power so that it becomes strong enough to be able to defeat the Demon King. And how she does this is that she eats her secret stone in a process called draconification and becomes an immortal dragon, but loses the essence of who she is in order to heal the Master Sword. And in present time, Link finds the Light Dragon, which is Zelda as a dragon, and the Master Sword that is now healed and immensely more powerful than it was before, and uses the help of the sages to go against Ganondorf in a many-phase boss battle and eventually wins. Zelda, the Light Dragon, gets turned back into human, which is very nice because I was very worried that it wasn't going to happen during the game. Very worried. And all is well in the Kingdom of Hyrule for now. But on to the actual analysis of the game. Basically, the main point of this game in terms of hands is the arm. It's originally Rauru's, but because of the extensive injuries that the Gloom caused to Link's arm, it was somehow attached to Link, and he now also can possess all of the powers that Rauru has, but in a tutorial island, he goes to different shrines to get these abilities and learns how to use them, and then gets sent on his merry way. In terms of story, this is very smart because there is a reason, story-wise, why suddenly we have different abilities than in the first game. Because in the first game, we had the Sheikah Slate, and that gave us the abilities. So, and we don't really know where it came from. We just had it, kind of. So now in this game, we actually get a reason as to why we have these abilities that we can use. And also explains why suddenly all of the heart containers that Link had at the beginning of the game suddenly go back to 3. Ouch. And as I mentioned earlier, it is the vessel or the conduit that Link uses to use all of these powers and to manipulate the area, space, and time around him as he can. It's also interesting aesthetically because it keeps tracks of the vows of the sages. So he has 5 rings on his finger and a circle on the back of his hands, and all of the 5 rings, once you obtain the vow of the sages, get this symbol that you have it onto a ring. And the plate on the back of his hand, he gets when he obtains the power of recall from Princess Zelda in this interesting dream-like world in the Temple of Time at the beginning of the game. It's the last skill that he unlocks after the 4 shrines. It's also maybe a little bit obvious, but it emphasizes different plot points because it glows. It's kind of like a glow stick. So when something important happens, like the Master Sword gets called back in time at the Temple of Time at the beginning of the game, the arm glows. So does the Master Sword. So Link is, oh, of course, sword, go into light, because glowy stuff. I mean, we all know that he's a himbo, so like, the story has to help him somehow. And different instances where the arm glows is as well as when he receives any of the vows of the sages or any lights of blessings in the shrines. And what the devs also wanted to highlight was the fact that it's very recognizably Link from Tears of the Kingdom. And I thought this was a very interesting point because from a character design's perspective, it is very unique. And it's not like any sort of Link that we've had in any of the past Zeldas, not just Breath of the Wild, but the franchise in general. And when the arm wasn't attached to anyone anymore, it was a personification of the arm. So we see that it's a detached arm when we see that it's sealing Ganondorf, or dehydrated Ganondorf. And it still has a part of the soul of Rauru, or the spirit of Rauru, and that's why it's able to act, because it's keeping up the seal that he made long, long ago. And even when it's not sealing the dehydrated corpse, which was the original point of the whole arm in the first place, I mean, shouldn't it have just, gone away after that? Because it did its job. But no, they decided that it's going to save Link and going to transplant itself onto Link's body after that. And I mean, once again, it's a very interesting story reason as to why Link is different and what happens and how we get these different abilities afterward. In terms of the abilities that Link gets from this new arm, there are 5. 4 maybe useful ones. I'm sorry, auto build, I barely use it. But fuse is where you can basically glue any sort of object to a weapon to enhance the weapon's hit points. And a big one at the start of the game were meat arrows and just really random stuff attached to really random weapons, but it works. And just saying a Nokia phone fused to a hammer would have like more hit points than the Master Sword, honestly. And then there's Recall, the time ability that he gains from Zelda, which is a part of Zelda's powers as well, because she has the power of time. And Ascend and Ultra Hand. Ascend, you can go through a platform that's above you, and Ultra Hand is where you can glue anything to anything, basically, which is how the whole Korok torture devices became a thing. And auto build is just if you have any recipes or builds that you've built with Ultra Hand, you can save them and then build it faster later on. So it's more important later in the game, and it's how people create these absolutely humongous creations and suddenly just drop them on Ganondorf in the boss battle, or a bunch of bokoblins that were just dancing or trying to eat. Just violence everywhere. And all of these are from the hand, and there's some sort of behavior that happens with the hand in order to use these abilities. I mean, when he's using Ultra Hand and he picks something up, he physically moves his arm like this so that the thing also moves in that direction. In terms of the different types of hands in the game, there are several different races, and Hylians are the ones that most closely resemble us as humans. And it's also one of the main races in the Zelda franchise. Both of its most reoccurring characters, Princess Zelda and Link, are both Hylians. And I'm sorry, my thoughts just completely went poof. As you can suspect, their hands are very similar to our hands, in size, in shape, in how they work. And in terms of character design, they don't vary that much, but for example, Queen Sonia has really interesting markings on her hands and arms. And she appears to be the only one that really has these markings, at least from the characters that we see during the game. And it could be that she's a former priestess before she became a queen, but I couldn't really find any information about that. And then we also have buff arms, like Taro, the lead investigator for the Zonai survey team, and just showing that there are different variations, just like in us normal humans. And I wanted to use this as a baseline in comparing hands to the different races and the different characters in this game, because that also emphasizes the differences, but also the connection between certain characters. Like, for example, the sages. In order for the sages to give their vow to Link, they somehow hold his hand. And then they completely start glowing, and that glow goes from their arm to Link's hand, which then carves the sigil into his ring, which means that he now has the vow. And one of these peoples are the Rito, and they are a form of bird people. And as you can see, they have wings instead of hands, but they're very large wings compared to Link's hand that is in the photo here that you can see. And this screenshot is specifically when the vow is being transferred, and I felt like those were very important plot points, especially in the main storyline, because it shows and solidifies the connection and the relationship that these sages and Link now have, which is very important later on in the game, especially when going against Ganondorf. We also have Gorons, the rock people, and an interesting fact that, I mean, it's very obvious, but some may not realize, is that they're all male, and nobody actually knows how they reproduce or how they come to being. We get a side quest in this game where we help two older Gorons find the place of their birth, which is in this cave, and they're bathed in moonlight, but it doesn't really open up the specifics of what goes on, but probably not how we reproduce.
From what I understand, they are like born from the crowd, like they are like basically like
Rocks,
like,
and then they
like,
become,
they just like emerge from the crowd.
yeah.
Yeah, that's how they're born. That's how I've understood it.
But like, why do specific rocks become Gorons? Like, what is it? A specific type of rock? Is it the place? Is it the circumstances? I'm like really interested in that, but I don't think Nintendo is really gonna open up that too much. At least I'm assuming, because they're really hard to get information out of sometimes. But as we can see, Link's hand is absolutely very tiny compared to Yunobo's hand in this screenshot. And in the previous slide where Tulin was holding out his wing and shaking hands, as you would, here Yunobo is giving him a fist bump. Goro. And I thought this was also really interesting because the size differences were just so huge. And like, one of his fingers is thicker than Link's entire arm, like thicker than Link's bicep. That's just really interesting structurally, but of course it's character design, and game physics don't apply to real world, so yeah. We also have the Zora, which are the fish people, and they're one of the most humanoid species at least compared to the Rito and the Gorons, where they are very obviously a bird and a rock, but here he looks more human than he does a fish. is what I'm saying. And despite this humanoidness, they're very tall. They're way taller than any of the Hylians, and they have a way longer lifespan than Hylians do as well. And as we can see in Sidon's vow, he holds Link's hand with both of his hands. And he actually kneels so that he gets on Link's level. And as we know from the previous game as well, they have a very close relationship, and they're really good friends. And I mean, in this game, we see that Sidon literally replaced a memorial statue of his sister for a statue of him and Link riding in the water. So they're pretty buddy-buddy, you know. But we see that there is this huge amount of respect for Link from Sidon. And the Zora are basically the only race that acknowledge any of the acts that Link did in the previous game. They're like, oh, let me get you these Zora's Greaves and stuff, but I can't find it. It's in this, cave, and I don't know where that cave is. But then when you go to the Gorons, they're just like, oh yeah, you have to buy that fireproof armor so that you can get into the cave so that you can save us. But like, gotta make money, you know? Doesn't matter if you're the savior of Hyrule or anything. And we also have the Gerudo, which are the desert people, and they are human as well, but they're a different race of human. And it's interesting that they only have females. And the exception to this is that there is one male born every 100 years, which at the founding of Hyrule's time was Ganondorf. And the male that is born is automatically the king of the people. He is very sacred, he is important, but Ganondorf, took it, ran with it, and was like, oh, I only get this desert, I want the entire kingdom. Come on. And there's been interesting discourse online about, well, there's been thousands of years between the founding of Hyrule and where we are in present day, and Ganondorf is still the only Gerudo male that is acknowledged throughout this time. And the current theory is that because Ganondorf, even though he is dehydrated and looks like a mummy, he is still technically alive, so that prevents from any Gerudo males being born, because technically there is still one in existence. And unlike Ganondorf, we have Riju, who is the current chief of the Gerudo, and she's much nicer than Ganondorf. And her plushies are so cute. They are awesome. I want some as well. And they're usually very tall women, but Riju is quite short. So as you can see, the hands, when Riju is transferring her vow to Link, they have pretty much the same size hands. I mean, Link is kind of short for a Hylian as well, when compared to a lot of the NPCs in the game. So we can assume that this is about a little bit less than average of the normal hand size of these human races in the Kingdom of Hyrule. And of course there's another human race, or a race of humans in the game, but it's not emphasized in Tears of the Kingdom. It's the Sheikah. And then divulging from that, the Yiga. But there aren't really any relevant plot points where there are hands and Sheikah and or Yiga. I mean, unless we count Koga's absolutely amazing poses that he does, but the storyline can progress without them as well. And in this game, we got a glimpse of a new sort of race, which is the Zonai. And according to the lore, the myths of Hyrule is that they're an ancient race that once descended from the heavens as gods. And so they were very highly revered in society. And with them came this amazing technology and these secret stones that had immense power. But during current Hyrulean times, there aren't any alive, at least that we know of. We see lots of relics from the past from the Zonai. For example, in the south of Hyrule, where there is a lightning puzzle to get to Minaru's construct in the depths. That's a big area that is just completely Zonai architecture, for example. And so the only two Zonai that are shown in the game are Minaru and Raru, and their siblings. And Raru is the king, the founding king of Hyrule, and Minaru is his older sister and is the most knowledgeable about the Zonai and their race as well. And just like the Zora, the fish people, Zonai are quite humanoid, but they have more a feline or mammalian sort of animal characteristics compared to, fish. And once again, they're way taller than Hylian, so they have sort of the same proportions as the Zora, where they have a long body and a very long torso, but very short legs. And so that was also interesting in terms of character design, is that they could have completely gone for different proportions, but they went with the same height and the same proportions as well in these more humanoid, non-human races. And with Minaru, we see her hand in this dreamlike world because she doesn't have a physical body anymore, so this is her spirit, and she's the sage of spirit. Anyway, and she holds her hand palm upward, and Link places his hand on top of hers. So it's also very interesting to see how these different characters use their hands and how they offer their hands to Link, because it just goes to show what kind of personalities they have and what kind of power hierarchy there is between Link and these characters, which in most of them is very equal. But like, for example, with Sidon, he has immense respect for Link, and so he kneels down, and in this game he becomes the king of the Zora, so he doesn't basically have to kneel down for anyone if he doesn't want to, but because of their friendship, he very immensely respects Link. And with Minaru, it's maybe the character that has the least interaction with Link. And her stature is very elegant, she's very poised, and so she offers her hand very elegantly and poised as well. But with her construct, a main part of the gameplay with her construct is that you can attach or fuse things to the arms of the constructs, and then you can swing them around. So, core gameplay mechanics. And continuing with the vows of the sages, like I mentioned earlier, they are all transferred with somehow holding of hands. It not only shows that there is a physical power flowing between them and being transferred, but also signifies and symbolizes the relationship and the connection that is formed, if not already there, with Link and the sages. And especially with the symbols on the rings, it just makes this point of the story that would otherwise be very ambiguous. Oh, okay, you promised me that you're gonna help me, but like, what proof do I have that you're actually gonna do it? So it makes it into a tangible and concrete form that you can actually, well, touch almost. I mean, I'm not sure if you can touch the blue floating ghosts of the sages. So I'm not sure how physical they are, so I'm not sure if that makes it tangible and concrete as well, but this definitely signifies the relationship, if nothing else, between Link and the sages. And something that I found very, very interesting in this game, in terms of story, is that it completely makes a full circle with the story itself. In the beginning of the story, we see that the ground falls from under Zelda, not the Zelda falls from under the ground, and Link jumps in after her, trying to catch her, and this scene is in slow motion. It is very emphasized when you watch this cutscene, and especially the moment where their hands and their fingers just barely touch, but then they miss. It was so close, and you get this exasperation that, oh, it was right there. If you just could have reached out a little bit more. But this sets up the tone for the entire game, that Zelda is trying to find her way back to Link, and Link is trying to find his way back to Zelda. And at the end of the game, when Zelda is transformed back into a human, they're in the sky, and they're both falling, and we have a parallel, almost a complete replica of what happened at the beginning of the game, and it's a chance at redemption, that Link can finally catch Zelda. And in this moment, it's not just a cutscene. You have to physically dive to get closer to Zelda, and then when you get close enough, you also have to press A to actually grab her hand. And this is the moment that Link finally gets back to Zelda, which has been one of the main objectives for the entire plot of the story of the game. And so it's a really interesting story mechanic to have it come full circle, and there's a chance at redemption as well. And yeah, I thought it was really interesting, and I had read the interview before I started the game. So when I was going through my first playthrough, it definitely added just a layer to the experience, because I was looking at all these moments where hands are somehow significant or relevant. Even if they weren't, I was reading into everything. I was what an English teacher would love, but an author is like, yeah, no, that was totally coincidence. It just happened. And you're reading into it that, oh, this is so relevant, and this is so deep, and this is so significant. And one of these ones that I kind of read into, but I thought was really interesting, is that during the end credits, we get these photos, and a lot of the photos are actually focused on hands. Wow. Shocker. And I just thought it was so interesting that they put so much thought and so much attention to detail, so that there are these moments that if you didn't know that this was a main theme of the game, you could just completely glance over it, that, oh yeah, these are important plot points. Yeah, so. But then when you know that they specifically had this thought in mind that they tried to recreate throughout the game, you're like, oh wow, that's a thing. I have insider information into that thing. And another way that hands are used throughout the game is also the fact that the powers, not just the abilities that Link uses with his arm, but the powers used by the others in the game. So King Raru, Queen Sonia, Princess Zelda, any of the sages, a lot of them are used by their hands. So in this screenshot specifically, we see the memory where Ganondorf tries to attack the Kingdom of Hyrule, but Rauru dispels it with his light powers. And these light powers are amplified by Queen Sonia and Princess Zelda. And this is also a pretty important point in the plot, because this is the first time that Princess Zelda, after knowing what her powers are, uses her power. And not only is Queen Sonia, but Princess Zelda herself surprised at how much power she has, which very not metaphorically is shown at how big the glow is that emanates from her hand. And with this help, Rauru is able to deter Ganondorf, but it's also the reason that he starts vying for the secret stones, because he figures out, oh, those things give a lot of power. I want one, of course. And this other picture where Zelda is very much glowing is after she eats her secret stone. And the light is glowing from directly inside of her, not just her hands, but a lot of the very iconic scenes or photos that are used with the game, for example, in articles and such, are these where Zelda is posed with the Master Sword, either before she starts glowing, not the ones where she starts glowing, but she has a very specific way of holding the Master Sword and just having the hands on the Master Sword and how they're placed. And one could go into even deeper analysis of how she handles the Master Sword, because the Master Sword is also personified. It's a she, and she glows as well and wants to go back in time to get imbued by Zelda's sacred power. And once again, the relationships, not just the physical, but also the symbolic and emotional connections that these characters have. And arguably the most important one in this game, and in majority of the games in this franchise, is the one between Link and Zelda. It's always Link trying to find Zelda, but I'm glad that in this game Zelda is actually a very important part of the storyline. And without her entire legwork at the era of the founding of Hyrule, Ganondorf would not have been beaten. She is very important to the defeat, and she's the one that goes to the original sages in the past and asks them that, oh, can you give your secret stones to the generations to come so that they may reawaken and become sages and help Link fight the Demon King? I mean, she's the one that orchestrates the entire ordeal. And it's like basically canon that they're in a relationship from this game. I mean, Zelda moves into Link's house in Hateno Village, and she replaces all of his really cool armor on the walls for paintings. So, and they only have one bed. So, I'm just saying. And it's really interesting to also look at the other relationships between these characters, because we have Rauru and Sonia, who are very clearly in love with each other and admire and hold each other as equals. In the side quest messages from the ancient era where there are the stone tablets in the sky that you have to drop down and then take to a Zonai survey investigator to get translated. One of the tablets says that before they got married, Sonia was a priestess, and Rauru very often went to her for counsel about what to do with the kingdom and his own affairs, and he actually listened to her advice. So we can see that Rauru genuinely respects and reveres the thoughts and Sonia as a person as well. And not only do they hold hands as spirits to help Link turn the Light Dragon back into Zelda, they also hold hands to imbue you with the lights of blessing in every single shrine of the game. And not only do they have very close relationships with each other, but they end up forming pretty close relationship with Princess Zelda as well when she goes to the era of the founding of Hyrule. And in one of the memories where Sonia shows what the powers, the time powers are like, and how she uses that power in order to help Zelda learn how to master this, she takes Zelda's hands into her own, as seen in the photo on the bottom, and comforts her. And Zelda really needs this at this point because she's completely lost. She doesn't know how she's going to get back to her time, because how is she suddenly going to learn mastery of this power that she just discovered, basically. And not even Queen Sonia is at the level where she could transport herself thousands of years worth in time, backwards or forwards. And they're all also very concerned about the threat of Ganondorf, because Zelda is a very empathetic person, and we can see that all throughout the games, and little tidbits like she helps out at the school in Hatino Village, and she really cares for the children. And also she's planted these memorials along different ruins throughout the Kingdom of Hyrule, and lays a silent princess on the memorials to show that the people that were lost because of the calamity in Breath of the Wild are not forgotten about. And to reiterate as well, there is this relationship between Link and the sages, and how their connection and their friendship is very important to actually progressing and defeating Ganondorf. And I wanted to show this picture on the right. It's a pre-release art poster to gather hype for the game before it came out. And this specifically also shows the scene that I mentioned where Link is trying to catch Zelda. And as I talked about it, it's pretty relevant to the plot. It completely ties the story from the beginning to the end together. And Nintendo clearly knew this and completely ran with it. And as the developers mentioned as well, the relationships are not only with the friendships and the relationships between two different characters or different characters, it's also between the past and the present of Hyrule. So we have this storyline that's cut up into two different times, and there is a lot of interaction between these times. At the beginning of the game, where Link receives the power to recall, he, in a dreamlike world, sees Zelda, and Zelda doesn't say anything, but she offers him her hand, and that's the big picture that you can see here, and transfers her power in a similar manner as the vows of the sages are transferred to Link's arm as well. And Another really good example about this is the dreamlike messages that the original sages tell to the sages that are reawakened. So Tulin, Yunabo, Riju, and Sidon, they tell them first about their imprisoning war and what happened, and then they ask that, can you honor this vow that I made to Princess Zelda and take up the secret stone and fight alongside Link? And there's just so many layers to these relationships, because you can also consider them as these connections to the different characters, but also between the times themselves, and then how the original sages are connected to the current sages, which are connected to Link, but the original sages are connected to Zelda, and it's just this whole intricate network of these connections and relationships that are very many times signified with hands connecting or hands touching, which, like the developer said, this game is more about those connections and those relationships compared to Breath of the Wild, which is a more lonesome game. As I mentioned earlier, there is the lore aspect as well in the game that very much uses hands, and these come in the form of the murals that are under Hyrule Castle that Princess Zelda and Link discover at the beginning of the game. And as we can see, there is Ganondorf stealing the secret stone from Queen Sonia in the bottom left corner, and he has his arm raised and is holding the secret stone. So it's very important because he's grasping towards it. And in the picture above it, he has already gained the secret stone and is now the Demon King. And with his arm, he raises the army of Bogoblins and Lysolfoses and Stalnoxes and such, which also in the cutscenes where he sends surges of gloom upwards into the sky, he also does this motion with his arm and with his hand to control the power that he has. And on the top right, we see the Demon King going against the sages and King Rauru. And here he is kind of depicted as this cloud of gloom with its arms outstretched. Once again, the hands are very aggressive and foreboding, and they're coming for the sages, which are quite tiny in comparison to the big cloud of gloom that is the Demon King in this panel of the mural. And a little bit more wholesome is the one on the bottom right, which depicts the union and the relationship between King Rauru and Queen Sonia, and how they got married and became the first king and queen of Hyrule. And Rauru also bestowed one of the very valuable, very sacred secret stones onto Queen Sonia. In terms of cinematography, there are a lot of cutscenes in this game. There's nearly 3 hours worth just in the main storyline. I know because I had to watch through it several times to get the visual content for this presentation. And all of the posing and the shots and how they have designed to have these sequences play out in these cutscenes are very focused on hands. There are so many shots where there is just a hand and something is happening, or then a scene opens up with a hand. For example, the picture on the left is Zelda in the first Dragon Tear memory, and it is the first shot that you see where she is grasping the secret stone that she used to transport herself back in time. And there are so many instances of hands that, once again, you can read into them, but not all of them are relevant. And if I went through and analyzed each one, it would take this entire day. I am not overstating how many shots of hands there is. I'm not sure how they made it so natural because none of it feels forced, but they put a lot of thought and a lot of hands into these cutscenes. And like you see, Ganondorf clutches his hand after he gains the secret stone and becomes the Demon King, and he's like, "Wow, I'm so powerful. I'm gonna take over Hyrule now. I'm so cool." And Ganondorf also uses a lot of his hands, and we can learn a lot about these characters from the storytelling principle show, don't tell. It's basically used in any form of storytelling. It can be comics, it can be books, it can be paintings, it can be literally anything that tells a story. And the principle is that instead of telling your audience what is happening, you show them what is happening. So instead of saying, Kyle is sad, you would say, Kyle is crying. So now this character is behaving in some sort of way, and you can gather that, oh, well, he must be sad because he's crying. Not saying that every time you cry, you're sad, but as a oversimplified example of this. And they use this a lot in the cutscenes as well. And with Link as well, I mean, he is nonverbal. The only noises you get are grunts when he's using stamina, or like an exclamation of joy when he cooks a dish. It's the happiest he is at that point. And even when he explains to, for example, Pura what happened to Zelda, he just waves his arms around. And you get the idea that, oh, okay, communication is happening, but there are no noises that are coming out. And they use this with these other characters to show what kind of personality they are. Are they aggressive? Are they very overboding, like for example Ganondorf, or are they more poised and elegant, like for example Minoru, who is very calculated and very kind of slow movements. And also, I can't have a presentation about hands in Tears of the Kingdom if I don't mention Gloomspawn, aka Gloom Hands. They are terrifying. You can't outrun them the first time you see them. No, and then the first time that you actually beat them, wow, not so much fun. In my first playthrough, I was kind of speedrunning the main quest because I was so interested in the story. And so I get to the Korok Forest and the Korok Belly, and it was the first time that I actually defeated the Gloom Hands. And you can imagine my surprise when suddenly a Phantom Ganon appears, and I'm like, oh no, what am I gonna do? And also just very interesting type of character design from developers where they made an enemy that is literally just hands, considering that their theme is also just hands. And of course, there is a lot more that I could have mentioned, but I feel like with the information given right now, this is a pretty good overview of what happens in the game, and I want to thank you for coming and listening, and I hope you found some sort of tidbits about the game that you didn't realize that you can take into your next gaming session of Tears of the Kingdom. Thank you. Any questions or comments? Yes, go ahead.
Well, I have a comment, although I haven't actually finished the game yet, so I'm maybe halfway through or one third through, but it's actually interesting because I didn't really understand or like get the hand theme yet, but now when I'm gonna play the game more, then I will probably see more hands. But it makes now it makes sense why the Phantom Ganon or the Gloom Hands enemy is just hands. So
Yes, thank you. So he mentioned that he's halfway through his playthrough and he didn't know about this theme, so now he can definitely make more connections and have more insight into the game. And I agree. I was very glad that I read this interview before playing through the game because there's just a whole nother world when you like realize what kind of thoughts the developers put into the game. Yes.
I like how you highlighted how the hands represent relationships and all of that in the game. But I also think it's interesting that the glue hands you mentioned, that I feel like they kind of highlight that you can use hands as means of good. You can use them to connect to people and use them for good, but you can also use them for evil. You can use them to control. And I feel like that's what the glue hands emphasize as a sort of thing.
Yes, I completely agree. It's very interesting that they were able to use hands in good and bad as well, in good and both bad, because it would be very one-sided if it was only used for good. And like Ganondorf especially, he is very handsy with his behavior and mannerisms. And the Gloom hands, I mean, it's pretty genius when you think about it, and it's so simple in its design, but it works so well. And it just grabs Link, and he's unable to move at all, and it's like all encompassing. I mean, the sky turns red as well, and there's these foreboding music and everything. Yeah.
I think what's also interesting is that like this is the first game where like we've seen like for example like enemies being hands in Zelda games because like it's like very common actually for there to be like a floor master or like something that's like like just hand that's grabs Link just yeets him basically.
Yes, I agree. Um, it's very cool seeing because I mean the Zelda franchise in general is known. They have a lot of really iconic monsters and enemies. I mean, just from Breath of the Wild, you have the Guardians. I mean, and now definitely Gloomhands have the same sort of status as the Guardians from the first game. Yes.
You mentioned that your first time defeating hands was in the forest, but do you remember where or when your first time actually encountering hands
The first time that I encountered the hands, I feel like it must have been somewhere around the Great Plateau, maybe. But it was more of a. There wasn't a lot of terrain that you can climb up on, so it was very flat land. And of course, I started like sprinting away from them, but then they were faster than I was, and I was like, oh no, what am I gonna do? And well, you don't have Rivali's Gale, which would be so good in getting away from them. No, you just have Tulin's push of wind. So I think I fast traveled. Yeah, I just fast traveled away. Also, I forgot to mention, but if you would like to give some kind of feedback or something, there in Kompassi, where there is the Ohjelma, you can give feedback there, and it would be very interesting to hear. And if you have any more questions about it, you can leave your social media handle, and I can reply because you can't reply through Kompassi directly. Yes. And thank you for being such a good audience.